I think there are basically four major reasons why this is in the interest of the United States. And it begins with the fact that what Svi said, that the situation in the Middle East has changed. The conditions under which we came up with the policy that we've been following since 1967 toward the Golan simply no longer exist, and we need to start rethinking. It's amazing when you talk to people in Washington, experts who have been dealing with this region for a long time, how little new thinking there is. So really, we need a spur to this. We start from the. I think we have to start from the principle that the Golan Heights is a natural geographic barrier between Syria and Israel, but which works toward peace and stability only when it's in the hands of Israel. When it's in the hands of the Syrians, as everyone said, it's going to be in the hands of the Iranians. The Iranians are going to be sitting on top of the heights, looking down at Tiberias through the scopes of their rifles. You can see how they're instigating violence against Israel on the West Bank and in Gaza as part of an effort of pushing back against the American-dominated order in the Middle East. So a U.S. policy that is focused on supporting its allies, punishing its enemies, and creating regional stability for the entire international system should take that simple fact into account. The second point, as mentioned, is that any possible settlement is going to mean Iranian soldiers on the Sea of Galilee, right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, looking down, as I said, their rifle scopes at Tiberias, and overlooking Jordan as well. The stability of Jordan is very much wrapped up here. It's not simply an Israeli interest by any stretch of the imagination. A little known fact, by the way, one of the arguments against a change in policy by the United States is that that would legitimate the acquisition of territory by force. And the people who say this say that there's an absolute prohibition, something I don't believe, but there's an absolute prohibition in international law against that. But if we go back to the 4 June 67 lines, which is what the Syrians have consistently demanded, that puts them in control of territory, that gives them sovereignty over territory, which they took from Palestine in the 48 war. It gives them territory on the Sea of Galilee, which they were not given by the partition plan, and it gives them territory in the south of the Sea of Galilee on the Israeli and Jordanian border, which they were not given. So we basically give to the Syrians, we give them acquisition of territory by force. So the principle is only, at the moment, is only being applied toward the Jewish state and not toward Syria. The next point is the inherent instability of Syria. What this civil war should have taught us is that no matter what happens in Syria, even if the Assad regime falls tomorrow, a new regime is in place, that new regime kicks out Russia and Iran. I mean, these are things are impossible to imagine at the moment, but kicks out Russia and Iran and reaches out to the West, reaches out to the United States and says, we want a whole new approach to relations with you. There's no guarantee that that regime is going to last more than 6 months. This country is inherently unstable. It's basically an artificial creation. If you go back 1,000 years, there's no, unlike Egypt, unlike Iran, there's no polity in that area that looks anything like modern Syria. This region historically has been a crossroads between empires centered in Istanbul, centered in Baghdad, or Mesopotamia more broadly, and centered in Cairo. Go back and read the Bible, that's what it's always been. So, and that's what it is now. We're seeing before our eyes what Syria has always been. So if we want a stable regime on the Golan, it means it has to be in the hands of the Israelis. And then the final point is just that American policy should be based on reality. It shouldn't be based on a fantasy of what we want the Middle East to become. And the fact of the matter is, and Svi said it very clearly, nobody in Israel is ever going to, they'd be crazy. The Israelis would have to have a fit of madness to give up the Golan Heights. They're not going to do it, and we're not going to make them do it. And every policymaker in Washington has to know that. But yet here, just this last week, we had a hearing here in Congressman DeSantis's committee in which a former ambassador said that every former Israeli prime minister has negotiated with the Syrians on the basis of giving up the Golan. What American interest is served by dangling out the possibility to our enemies that we will give up that territory, that we will force the Israelis to give up that territory? And by the way, part of the reason that every Israeli prime minister has negotiated on the basis of giving up the Golan is because the United States insisted that they do that. It was not a desire on their part to go give up the Golan. It was a desire to keep their American ally happy. But what interest is served by that? What interest is served by telling the Iranians that their propaganda about Israel occupying Arab land, that we, the United States, regard their propaganda as having some basis, some valid basis? If we, the United States, recognize Israeli sovereignty on the Golan, we'll be sending a very clear message to the people of Syria that the resolution of the Syrian civil war, in order to have the support of the United States, has to be carried out under certain conditions. And I actually believe it's very much in the interest of the Syrian people for the Golan to be to remain in the hands of Israel. They may not feel that way. I don't know how to poll the Syrian people on this question. They may not feel that way, but it is. Why is it? Because the Iranians and the Russians are willing to fight the Israelis to the last Syrian. They don't care about Syria. They're not concerned about it. They want to use that territory to put pressure on the Israelis and on the American system. And we should do everything we can not to let that happen.